The strange story behind the Adam's apple, the weird truth. The name Adam's apple brings to mind a dramatic biblical story, one that has been passed down through centuries. According to legend, when Adam took a bite of the forbidden fruit, a chunk got stuck in his throat, creating the bulging lump we now see on men's necks. The story goes even further. God, displeased with Adam's sin, left this permanent reminder of his disobedience. And so, every man after him was supposedly born with the same mark, while women, who were only partially responsible, were spared the full effect. But here's the thing. This story isn't in the Bible. Nowhere in the scriptures does it mention Adam choking on a fruit or being cursed with a throat bulge. It's a classic example of how folklore evolves, taking on a life of its own. The translation mix-up. The real origin of the name is a lot less dramatic and a lot more linguistic. The confusion began with the Hebrew word Adam, which doesn't just refer to one man, but to mankind as a whole. Then there's another Hebrew word, one related to apple, which actually means bump or swelling. Put them together, and what you really get is the bump of man, not Adam's apple. But when the phrase was translated into other languages, people misunderstood it, thinking it literally meant apple of Adam. And just like that, the name stuck. By the time the term reached English in the 1600s, it had already been locked in place. And once a mistake becomes common enough, well, it becomes the truth. The pomegranate connection. But there's another twist in this story, one that takes us even further back in time. Some medieval Arab medical writers referred to this throat bump as a pomegranate. Why? That part isn't entirely clear. One theory is that the slightly textured skin of a pomegranate reminded them of the skin covering the protruding throat bump. Another possibility is that the pomegranate, a fruit steeped in symbolism across many cultures, simply seemed like a fitting name. In Greek mythology, the pomegranate played a major role in the story of Persephone and the underworld. In Islam, it was considered a purifying fruit. Even King Solomon was said to have pomegranate orchards. It was a fruit of significance, and perhaps that's why it found its way into medical descriptions. It's likely that when European scholars came across these texts, they translated pomegranate into pomum granatum, and then applied the synonymous pomum adami, meaning Adam's fruit, to the same body part. By the late 1500s, European medical texts were already using both pomegranate and Adam's apple interchangeably when describing the laryngeal protrusion. A 16th century anatomical work even states, partem protuberantem, que malum granatum et pomum Adami barbaris dicitur constituit, meaning, the protruding part, which is commonly called pomegranate and Adam's apple. The superstition spreads. As the name spread, so did the myths. In 1707, a writer named John Purcell reinforced the superstition, saying that the Adam's apple was a divine punishment on all men. He even claimed women had a smaller bump because their sin was less. A totally made-up explanation, but one that mirrored the legend already making its way through Europe. So, what is it really? Now that we've debunked the myths, let's talk about what the Adam's apple actually is. Scientifically speaking, it's called the laryngeal prominence, a feature of the thyroid cartilage that protects the vocal cords. Both men and women have it, but in males, it's larger and more pronounced because testosterone causes the larynx to grow during puberty. This also deepens the voice, which is why men tend to have lower vocal ranges. The power of a misunderstood name. So the Adam's apple didn't come from a choking accident in the Garden of Eden. It came from a translation mistake, a mix of linguistic confusion, medieval medical descriptions, and a bit of storytelling flair. But in a way, that makes the name even more interesting. It's a reminder of how myths can shape our understanding of the human body, and how language, no matter how ancient, can leave a lasting mark on our everyday lives.